My name is Geno Samuel, and welcome back to Discographies Yes, where I'll be giving an overview of every studio album by Yes, while briefly talking about the history of the band and the making of the album. Now, after the huge success of 1983's 90125, the band had to record a follow-up, of course. Trevor Rabin felt huge pressure from Atco Records, who wanted him to basically make the next owner of Lonely Heart, while he was more interested in moving past the pop-rock sensibilities of their previous album, and maybe even make an album more worthy of the band that is named Yes. So they started work on their next album in 1985 with Trevor Horn returning as producer. They began recording in Italy. Under Rabin's suggestion, feeling that it might bring the band more together, you know? Because Chris Squire and John Anderson were constantly at odds with each other during this time, with Rabin remarking that the situation actually gave him the space to write music by himself. And it was apparently also a very drug time for the band. Rabin didn't name any names, but he did say that there was a lot of drugs and partying involved at the time, which strained matters even further. Horn and Tony Kaye still couldn't get along, and I think this led to Kaye recording his keyboard parts in another studio, and then the band slotted them into the mix without Horn's approval. After 3 months in Italy, they apparently had finished most of the backing tracks, but due to inner band turmoil, Horn suspended production to move the band to London to try finish off the album. Things didn't settle, there were too many disputes, so Trevor Horn left the project, leaving Rabin to pick up the pieces. He ended up finishing off the album himself back in Los Angeles, his adoptive home, with the help of some extra producers. So the production process of this album sounds like a band on the brink of collapse. But how do the songs sound though? Well, let's just get into it, shall we? By the way, let me preface this by saying that this is the first Yes album that I ever heard. It was back on a pirated cassette that my dad made. It was called Yes 87 on side A, and side B was Fish Night, which was of course Fish's debut album. So yeah, I wore that tape out, and I absolutely loved it back then. But I'm gonna look at this album now with a more critical eye and a more open mind. So the opening track, Rhythm of Love, quite bluntly stated by Trevor Rabin, is about sex, leaving behind the mystic eternal of the 70s, yes. The song fades in with some samples of oriental-sounding orchestral arrangements and woodwind trills, before leading right into a Beach Boys-inspired vocal interlude that would serve as the basis of the pre-chorus sections in the song. Even though this is very explicitly a Beach Boys-style section, it's not out of place considering the history of the band. The very first track off their debut album, Beyond and Before, also has some Beach Boys-inspired vocalizations as well, so this in a way links back to the roots of the band. The main groove of the song is nice and punchy, especially in the drums, which sound rather lively, more than on the previous album, I think. Squire notably uses a special tuning on his 5-string bass here, providing some wonderfully filthy bass lines that go a lot lower in pitch than what we usually hear from him. And he uses his 5-string bass throughout the album, actually. The guitar provides the simple but punchy muted picking riff. I love the opening line in the lyrics. Inner sun's no answer to your breaking heart. Almost feels like Anderson is saying, you forget about all that spiritual awakening crap from the 70s. This song is all about the horizontal mambo. The keyboards don't show up all that much in this song. Apparently Tony Kaye was more involved with the recording of this album than their previous effort, though Rabin still contributed a large part of the keys himself. There's some great, rich, dense vocal harmonies in the choruses, and like in 90125, there are a couple of different melodies that get introduced along the way and stack on top of each other. I do kind of feel that at times the music is a little too compressed. On their 1983 album, the arrangement itself was quite diverse and rich and full of goodies all over the place, but nevertheless wasn't stifling. The instruments still had room to breathe on the record. On this one, it seems like they cranked up the compression to fill the space. I know it's tempting to do that, and just a little bit can really make a huge difference to your mix, but it can be for better or for worse, you know? Apart from a brief linking section featuring lead vocals carrying over from Rabin to Squire to Anderson, this song is all Anderson. It's a pretty cool track. It's lighthearted and easy to dance to. It was released as a single and performed fairly well. Not bad. The second track is the title track, Big Generator. It opens with an intense a cappella arrangement that sounds like a darker version of Leave It. It doesn't stick around for long as the intro abruptly finishes and blasts into a full band arrangement led by an extremely heavy guitar and bass riff, using alternate tuning and reaching notes a lot lower than what a regularly tuned bass and guitar can play. There are also some brief runs from a very mellowy jazz-sounding guitar tone that interestingly contrasts with the angry heaviness of the main riff. Keyboards once again fall away and mostly come in for intermittent synth horn stabs, perhaps paying tribute to those in Owner of Lonely Heart. The verses, on the other hand, are very heavily focused on the soft synth pad sustaining the chords, as the arrangement gets really soft, with Alan White playing an odd beat with a hit on the kick drum on the offbeat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and apart from the constant hi-hat rhythm, it remains pretty subdued for the verses. Actually, the verses here are so soft that I think they are too quiet as a whole. I'm aware that the band are playing softly, but still, if these tracks had been boosted a little bit, maybe even with a little bit of compression, it would have benefited the track, because there is a healthy bass line that should be maintained across the album. You know, once you establish a healthy volume level to listen to at the beginning, that should remain consistent, making sure that no parts of the album feel too loud or too quiet to the point that you feel like you have to adjust the volume level on your system. This is how I feel for the verses. My ears get a little parched. Anyway, there's lots of echo in Anderson's vocals during these segments. He's got a really lovely melody to sing here. I love it. It's so angelic. The whole mood of the track does a complete 180 for the chorus and goes back to the heavy metal riff from the intro, now complete with huge, dense vocal arrangements. Big Generator! The drums feel organic and lively. We get some more horns here as well. It's an interesting production and goes through a lot of diverse mood swings and arrangements. There's a real off-the-wall type guitar solo during which Rabin physically assaults his whammy bar. It's pretty cool, it's fresh new sounds, and matches really well with the surprising heaviness of the song. There's a couple of these short linking sections that show up a few times on the track, which I feel would work better if the song was a bit longer. The way it is now, there's this sense that they had a lot of complex ideas, and they tried to stuff them all into a 4-minute something album track, while a length and structure of something like Into the Lens perhaps would have suited their ideas better. Rabin and White, who plays on snare here, plays this excellent little run into one of the last choruses that starts off real slow and speeds up into a frantic pace, and somehow they play this in unison like boom 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 boom. When you think that the final set of the repeated chorus is all you're going to get until the end of the song, they introduce this new melody line that's chock full of interesting jazzy harmonies and flat, dry vocals, completely devoid of reverb. This goes on for like 3 bars and then back into the chorus as we go. Flying out the soft machine, all surprise to you. Read the soundproof generator, moving to the left, moving to the right. We are the voices, Annie. The ending is a bit abrupt, though I'm not sure if any other kind of finish would have worked better. The song is pretty cool, though kind of feels like a rush job to make a track out of all of their ideas before a deadline, maybe. Next up is Shoot High, Aim Low, which fades in with abstract soundscapes from keys and atmospheric drum fills. When the beat finally kicks in, establishing the mood of the song, it's a pretty slow beat, it's very spacey. John and Trevor perform a call and response style singing line in the verses. And their interplay is really lovely, and their tones of voice complement each other greatly. The instrumentals keep pretty laid back, mostly just sustained notes on guitar and bass, all while Alan White keeps the song going with a steady halftime beat. The choruses follow a similar chord progression pattern as the verses, but the sound is quite different. Now, a big synth organ keeps the chords in check. The melody itself is alright, but it's nothing too profound. It's got good harmonies, and they get bigger with each cycle. I prefer the vocals of the verses though, they're more melodically diverse. Trevor delivers some nice, virtuosic guitar solos in this one. He did this great thing that was part of his style, wherein he liked to play fast runs all in 16ths with near robotic precision. Sometimes I lose my breath listening to his solos, like, Jesus, that's so fast and so cool. and so tasteful. The song continues to build up instrumentally to a climax that then falls back into a very soft, very gentle rendition of the chorus motifs. Shoot, aim low. And it revisits some melodies from across the song and finally leading into the fade out. It's a nice song. It's one of the best put together tracks on the album, I think. It's a bit long, it's about 7 minutes I think, but it's fairly simple thematically. This is followed by Almost Like Love, opening with a powerful 60s-like riff and drum beat with a 4 on the snare rhythm going on. There's a brass section on this one, playing the main recurring hook of the song. The mood is really cool in the verses especially, and the arrangement kind of sounds like a sped up bam, bam, ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. The city lights are always right on Broadway, ba-dum, ba-dum. And there's a very quacky keyboard line that helps to keep the beat in check. The vocals get pretty rapid actually, big long phrases squeezed into a small space. The 60s style drum pattern returns for the choruses. It's quite a popping, active arrangement, but the bass contrastingly plays long sustained notes for the most part, which I'd say is the way it is because it plays more or less together with the kick drum that largely stays away from anything outside of the first beat of each bar. So there's more of that wonderful teamwork from Chris Squire and Alan White. The instrumental portions are cool, and there are some appearances from the organ as well. Then Trevor brings out a wild guitar solo to go along with the fast pacing of this track. It ends with a fade out, but I think especially given that what the band are playing, I think a solid defined conclusion would have suited the song better. It's fine, it's inoffensive as it is, but not amazing either. Squire was very fond of the main riff of the song, whereas Rabin felt the song around it was weak, and disagreed with the inclusion of the horn section, comparing it to Susudio by Phil Collins, which, in case you don't know, is probably the most 80s song of the 80s. Now, Love Will Find a Way opens with a lovely string section that plays a motif that doesn't really have to do anything with anything. But hey, it sounds nice. This leads into a wonderful chorus guitar riff. Oh god, so good. This track was originally written by Rabin with the intention of having Stevie Nicks record it, but then Alan White heard the demo of it and said that Yes should have the song instead. I cannot praise the hook of the song enough, which then travels from the guitar to the bass and back around again. This song maintains a relaxed but confident feel. The snare exhibits that classic 80s gated reverb effect, and also an acoustic guitar can be heard strumming across the whole song. Trevor Rabin is on lead vocals, but for the most part you can't really tell because he is, for almost the entire track, accompanied by pretty dense vocal harmonies. There's a great linking section after the first chorus which allows John Anderson to come out of hiding and reminds us that we're actually listening to Yes. The post-chorus segment takes on a more serious, mysterious tone with an arrangement that doesn't reappear again in the song. And the vocals build up as they do with this lineup of the band, until we get to the end of this section with a grandiose "Love will find," and the band cuts out to allow Trev to finish the phrase on his own. Away! And they jump right back into the riff. It's such an exciting and cool little moment. Oh my god! The rest of the song pretty much sounds the same, and that's okay. Not every song has to be this grand expression of skill and musical diversity. Kay busts out a synth organ solo that then transitions into a joint guitar and harmonica solo, with Squire providing the harmonica portion. It's all quite cool. A cycle of choruses falls into the ending of the song, which is a bang actually. A very defined bang from the band. But in this case, I actually feel that a fade out would have suited it better, because the chorus is such an infectious groove, and the fade out would help ensure that you will continue to hum that melody well after the song fades into unexistence. It's a great song, an easy, uncomplicated listen, and it's probably my favorite track on the album. Definitely the one with the most re-listen value. The next track, Finalized, starts with an interesting synth loop that then leads into the main groove of the song. That's this strummed pattern on acoustic and electric guitar, and reminds me a lot of And You and I. John takes on lead vocal duties. His mixing here is kind of unusual. It doesn't stick all that well with the instrumentals, and is somehow very different sound-wise from the rest of his contributions on this album. Maybe this was recorded in a different studio. The lyrics are very much John Anderson style. Great use of the word river here as well. There's some great harmonies in here too, as ought to be expected from this group. The drums and bass come in and drastically change the overall mood of the music. It gets heavier and more upbeat. There's a great bit of a synth organ too, playing a counter melody throughout this whole new section. The whole song changes yet again, with an interesting key change and switch over to a halftime feel in the chorus. There's a delicate picking acoustic guitar and a tasteful filling of gaps in the wonderful Anderson melody line by electric guitar. Then they return back into the soft, drum-free acoustic verses. There's an awful lot of jumping around in this song, from soft folk to hard rock, and that does indeed remind me somewhat of And You and I. I also feel that they tried to employ that reverb cutoff technique from 90125 in here occasionally, but it doesn't work all that well here, and comes off as a bit sloppy in its delivery. And when you thought they couldn't get more diverse, they inserted an ethereal synth free rhythm link reminiscent of older tracks. After one final chorus, the song finishes with a wonderful picked acoustic guitar coda leading into the fade out. Trevor employs his special touch here. It's an interesting track, definitely one that's more explicitly yes sounding. I don't personally have a problem with all the mood swings in this track. I think it's a nice change of pace, chock full of memorable melodies and sing-along type phrases. It's pretty good. This is followed by I'm Running, the longest track on the record at almost 8 minutes, so you know this ought to be interesting. It opens with a bass riff. It's really active and complex, and for the longest time I thought there was a guitar. Bit by bit, it gets developed upon with the introductions of other instruments playing the same rhythm of the riff, but perhaps either in harmony or as chords. From acoustic guitar, then drums, then electric guitar too. The bass line gets very deep, because Chris is still using his special 5-string bass. This motif, which would repeat a few times throughout the song, has a bit of a Latin flavor to it, and includes some sounds of synths that feel like maybe steel drums. It's complex rhythm and timing, and just sounds like good old-fashioned yes, I think. The verses get quiet, and this mood swing reminds me of Changes actually. Those marimba sounding patterns in the background only further add to the similarity, but frankly that synth marimba was a very prominent 80s thing. The very sparse accompaniment allows John to belt out a killer hook. Both great melody and lyrics. Jacaranda, help me out tomorrow. Jacaranda, don't wanna be alone. Keep falling over. Ba 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 ba, give and take. You shouldn't be afraid. So you tell me this big story. It makes me every time. Blast the pick away. Things slowly pick up speed as the band leads into the chorus. Vocals proudly pronouncing, I am running. The driving force here is the drum beat, while everyone else moves quite slowly instrumentally. Apparently, Alan White's original drum track for the song was next to useless, perhaps the recording didn't come out quite right. So Rabin re-recorded the drums himself, note for note. So apparently it's actually Trev playing drums here. The compression in the vocals makes the reverb swell up before it begins receding. It's a really interesting sound. After a couple of couplets, the band returned to the opening, and it's quite a fun, jolly little riff. Then the drums take on a steady halftime beat as the others continue to move about, same as before, creating a polyrhythm effect, now with added vocals. The singing line is strong and it gets quite high and confidently commanding, giving the unusual backing chorus it sits atop. There's tight movement by all. And they do this little weird, rising, almost jumping bit that lasts all of a few seconds, and it comes off very cartoony, but it's so, my god, it's so awesome. I'll show you, hold on. It's not exactly like this, but it's something kind of similar, and I was so happy when I finally figured out how to basically play this. It's like this. Then that stops dead completely, and transitions back into the verse in the most cool way, with falling soft synths and a filthy bass drop. The next verse and chorus sound pretty similar to the ones before, with the addition of a light guitar solo. The vocals in the song are really dense, huge multi-tracking harmonies, but they still feel kind of mono, like all of the voices are just in the center. Anyway, at the end, we go back into the fast Caribbean rhythm one more time, now with Rabin playing this amazing machine gun fire-like strumming section. Vocals stack up on top of each other, huge sound. Rabin squeezes in another guitar solo. And then they do this really cool thing wherein for a couple of bars, the beat suddenly changes into a 6/8 blues pattern and without hesitation leads back into the familiar Latin riff and beat. Of course, studio trickery is possible to make this sound perfect. I haven't heard this performed live, so I can't say for certain how well they pulled this one off. But on the record at least, it's awesome. And they reach this huge epic climax and finally finish with one last cartoon rising I showed you before. It's an overall great track that simply sounds like Yes in the 80s. The album closes with Holy Lamb, Song for Harmonic Convergence, which is a composition by John Anderson paying tribute to harmonic convergence, which was a global synchronized meditation event which also coincided with a rare special alignment of the planets in August 1987. The song starts with a simple acoustic guitar strumming and John delivering vocals. Holy Lamb, see the world we started is so long again. His part begins pretty low for him, and his singing intensifies and gets higher and higher as the song progresses. There's also a slow buildup of atmospheric keys and guitar, and bouncy staccato beats on keyboards. This entire song is basically just the same 4 chords, 1, 6, 5, 4, in a major key. It all sounds pretty profound. I especially love the backing vocals that come in intermittently doing these. Then we get into the main beat, big drum sound, and huge gated snare effect, with the bass and electric guitar now taking over the rhythm that was being performed on acoustic guitar. The lead vocals sort of end pretty quickly here, and leaving the instrumentals to take over, though we do get some distant that fade in after a little while. I feel like the vocals should have had more breaks throughout the song. It would have made the song a bit longer, but I think it would have benefited it. Because as it stands, it's basically just a verse that endlessly repeats throughout the whole thing, with the melody constantly changing so there's no hook that you can really latch onto. It's a nice idea, but I feel like it's more just an idea that was extended and turned into a song rather than being composed as a song. It should have had more things going on than just this one section. I mean, it's alright, and I actually find myself singing the song to myself occasionally too. It's just a bit underworked and repetitive. So that's Big Generator. It kind of feels like an awkward transitional period between the pop sensibilities of 90125 and an eventual return to the more complex prog rock-like composition, resulting in an album that's not quite one or the other. It's still a pretty good listen, though band disputes contributed a lot to some songs not being realized to their full potential, maybe. The lack of Trevor Horn is very noticeable, and it sounds fairly fine throughout, though if you compare it with 90125, this comes off sounding almost murky, you would say. So taking everything into account, I'ma give Big Generator a well-deserved 7.5 out of 10. Now, the album was released in September 1987, after being worked on for 2 or 3 years. The vinyl sleeve art was a blue color scheme, while the CD release, and maybe the cassette too, was the same design but with a yellow and red color scheme. The front had the very simple geometric shaped big on it, and if you turn the record over, or the CD case over, you get Generator written on the back. The art was designed again by Gary Muat, who did the 90125 graphics too. The album performed pretty well commercially, but of course couldn't compete with 90125, and critically the reception was mixed. After they finished up their 87-88 tour, John Anderson left the band again, apparently dissatisfied with the quite commercial music direction of the band. You might say it's kind of hypocritical of him to say that, considering his 1988 solo album In the City of Angels sounds extremely poppy and more like a Toto album, and is by far his most accessible solo effort. But I would imagine that he had no troubles morally making more commercial songs by himself, but I guess he didn't want the reputation of Yes as a musical icon to be tarnished by the kind of music they were making. I don't know, it's all a bit messy. I wasn't there, I couldn't tell you. But fortunately for him, John teamed up with former Yes members Steve Howe, Rick Wakeman, and Bill Bruford, and they formed their own band called Anderson Bruford Wakeman Howe, or ABWH, and released an album of original music in 1988, I think, which in everything but name was a Yes album. I mean, this was the Yes of Fragile and Close to the Edge minus Chris Squire. By the way, the bass duties on that lineup went to Tony Levin, who had played with Bruford during their time with King Crimson in the early 80s. And since it ain't officially a Yes album, I won't be covering it here. I might do a standalone review later on. But anyway, while this was going on, Yes, now a 4-piece, was still together and were actually considering recruiting a new vocalist. Some contenders included Billy Sherwood, a young musician from the band World Trade, who Chris Squire met in 1989, and they became very close friends. Also, there were talks of getting Roger Hodgson of Supertramp into the mix. A new member was ultimately not introduced into the band, but something else happened. Something rather special. So tune in next Sunday when I'll be taking a look into their 13th studio album, Union. Like and subscribe for more original music and music reviews. Special thanks to my patrons, and if you're interested in contributing, there's links to my Patreon and original music in the description below. Thanks again. See you around. We good? We Gucci? We Gucci, we Gucci! We Gucci! Hey, and hello.